Imagine being 4 years old and watching your mother walk out the door. Not for an hour. Not for a day. Forever. Now imagine spending the next 70 years of your life trying to understand why. That was James Brown's entire existence, a lifetime of searching for an answer that never came, performed in front of millions who had no idea they were watching a man trying to fill a void that couldn't be filled. In Barnwell, South Carolina, in the spring of 1937, something broke inside a little boy that would never fully heal. And somehow, in the most painful, beautiful way imaginable, that broken piece became the foundation of funk music. It became the raw energy that electrified Apollo Theater. It became the desperate emotion that made grown men cry when they heard please, please, please. But the price James Brown paid for changing music forever? That's a story most people have never heard. Before we continue, if you want more untold stories about music legends, please subscribe to our channel. Barnwell, South Carolina in 1933 wasn't just poor, it was a place where survival meant negotiating with hunger every single day. James Brown was born on May 3 into a wooden shack that barely qualified as shelter. His mother Susie and father Joseph tried to carve out something resembling a life from red clay soil in impossible circumstances. The house had 4 walls and a roof, but it couldn't keep out the cold, the desperation, or the sense that everything was temporary. Little James absorbed all of this before he could even form words to describe it. He learned early that the world was a place where things you needed could disappear without warning, where the people you loved might not stay, where safety was an illusion that could shatter at any moment. He was 4 years old when the lesson became permanent. His mother was packing a bag, not a large bag, because she didn't know much to pack. James watched from the doorway, his bare feet covered in that red clay dust that got into everything. Susie moved quickly, her hands efficient, her face set in an expression that children recognize instinctively as the look of someone who has made an irreversible decision. She didn't look at James much. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe looking at him would have broken her resolve. The door closed. The latch clicked. And Susie Bailing walked down that dirt road and never came back. Not the next day. Not the next month. Not ever in any way that mattered to a 4-year-old boy who would spend decades waiting for her to return. James was left with a question that would haunt him for 70 years, why wasn't I enough to make her stay? And Susie Bailing walked down that dirt road and never came back. What James didn't know that day? This abandonment would make him the most electrifying performer in history. It would also destroy him. That day, James learned a lesson his body would never forget: love doesn't stay. But no one knew any of this yet. They just saw a little boy being sent to live with his Aunt Honey in Augusta, Georgia. What happened next in Augusta would give James a weapon. But weapons cut both ways. And this one? It would eventually kill him. In Augusta, James discovered something that would save and destroy him: performance. On those streets, he learned that if you were loud enough, visible enough, undeniable enough, no one could leave you behind. Or so he thought. By 1953, the gospel starlighters became his escape. But when James sang, he wasn't singing to God. He was singing to his mother. Every scream was a question: why did you leave? The famous flames formed. James rehearsed until he collapsed. The others begged for breaks. James couldn't stop. Stopping meant silence, and silence meant invisibility, and invisibility meant being left behind. But what happens when you can never stop? When the performance becomes the prison? The other flames thought it was dedication. They had no idea they were watching a man run from a ghost. And that ghost was catching up. In 1956, the famous Flames got their first real break, a recording contract with Federal Records. They cut a song called Please, Please, Please. It was simple, almost primitive in its structure. But when James sang it, something happened that nobody had heard before. The way he repeated that one word, please, over and over, the way his voice broke and strained, it wasn't a performance technique. It was real. Every time James sang that song, he was 4 years old again, watching his mother pack that bag, wanting desperately to say something that would make her stay but not having the words. Decades later, he still didn't have the words. All he had was please, please, please. Federal records had no idea what they just recorded. Not just a song. A 70-year scream. The song became a hit. But what nobody knew. Every time James sang it, he was 4 years old again. Standing in that doorway. Begging someone to stay. The song made him a star. But it also trapped him. Every night, he had to ask the question. Every night, no one answered. And every night, the wound got deeper. By 1962, James Brown was a successful regional performer, but he wasn't yet the legend he would become. He had an idea that everyone around him thought was commercial suicide. He wanted to record a live album at the Apollo Theater in Harlem. Record executives were horrified. Live albums were unpredictable. The sound quality was inconsistent. Artists couldn't control every element the way they could in a studio. But James insisted because he knew something they didn't. His real power wasn't in perfect studio recordings where every note could be polished and corrected. His power was in the raw, unfiltered desperation of his live performance, in the way he could take an audience and make them feel like they were witnessing something urgent and necessary and unrepeatable. October 24, 1962. Apollo Theater. James collapsed on stage that night, really collapsed, not performing. The crowd went silent. Then something happened that would change music forever. When James performed the cape routine that night, collapsing from exhaustion, being draped in a cape by his handlers, seeming to revive just long enough to stagger back to the microphone and launch into another verse, the crowd understood on some instinctual level that they were seeing more than showmanship. This was a man who literally couldn't stop performing because stopping meant confronting something too painful to confront. The album made James Brown a superstar. The pain worked. The desperation worked. He was finally impossible to ignore. Except the method he found, performing until collapse, again and again and again, would eventually cost him everything. But James wasn't satisfied. Success wasn't enough. Because the one person he needed to see it? She was gone. And he was about to make music so powerful, no one could ever leave again. Or so he thought. But James wasn't satisfied with being the biggest star in soul music. His brain was already hearing something new, something no one had ever tried before. A new rhythm that would change popular music forever. By 1965, something was changing in how James heard music. Traditional soul and R&B emphasized the backbeat, the 2 and 4 in a measure, creating a swing that was smooth and danceable. But James started hearing power in a different place. He heard it in the downbeat, the first beat of every measure. If you put the emphasis there, if you made that beat heavy and undeniable, the entire feel of the music transformed. It became harder, more insistent, more physical. It stopped being music you listened to and became music you felt in your body, music that demanded a physical response. The song that crystallized this new approach was Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, released in 1965. Everything in the song hit hard on the one in the guitar, the bass, the drums, all locking into this tight, repetitive groove that was hypnotic and irresistible. Radio programmers didn't know what to call it. It wasn't quite soul. It wasn't quite R&B. Eventually someone started using the word funk, and James Brown became known as the man who invented it. Funk wasn't just music. It was control. A beat so heavy you couldn't walk away. Just like James needed someone who couldn't walk away. Bobby Bird, Maceo Parker, Fred Wesley, Bootsy Collins, they played the same section 80 times. Some quit. The rest stayed because they knew this wasn't about music. It was about control. By 1968, James Brown was more than a musician. He was a symbol. But symbols don't get to be human. And James was about to learn that the hard way. April 4, 1968. Martin Luther King Jr. was shot and killed in Memphis, Tennessee. Within hours, American cities erupted. Rage that had been building for centuries poured into the streets. Buildings burned. Violence spread. Boston was on the verge of exploding, and city officials were desperate. James Brown had a concert scheduled for April 5 at the Boston Garden. The mayor made an unprecedented decision. They would broadcast the concert live on public television, hoping that if people could watch from home, they might stay off the streets and Boston might avoid the destruction that was consuming other cities. James agreed to do it, but he negotiated his terms. The ticket price would be reduced so his core audience could afford to attend. And the show would be on his terms, with no police interference unless absolutely necessary. April 5, 1968. The day after King died. Boston was about to burn. And the city's only hope? A man who couldn't even save himself. That night, James saved Boston. He stopped a riot with his voice. But here's what nobody asks: who was going to save James Brown? They listened. Boston didn't burn. James became a hero. But heroes don't get to be human. Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud became an anthem. But James was singing to a 4-year-old boy in Barnwell, telling him, "You matter." Except the boy never believed it. James had reached the peak. He'd proven he mattered. But here's the secret nobody knew: proving you matter doesn't heal the wound of being left. And that wound was about to consume everything. James Brown had reached the peak of his powers. He was the biggest star in black music, a cultural icon, a man who had performed his way from poverty to significance. But there was a secret that nobody knew, a truth hiding behind the cape routine and the screams and the impossible dance moves. The same wound that made James great was about to start destroying everything he'd built. The cape routine. James collapsed. Handlers draped a cape. He'd throw it off, stagger back. 4 times a show. People thought it was theater. It wasn't. Every collapse was real. Every resurrection was survival. They were watching a man work out his deepest trauma in front of thousands. Every collapse was real. Every resurrection was survival. The cape was his mother's arms, and he kept throwing it off because arms don't stay. They were watching trauma performed live. And they loved it. Which meant James could never stop. The audience had become his mother, always watching, never staying. The destruction begins. Adrian Rodriguez. By the 1970s, James Brown was trapped. Trapped by his own success. Trapped by the relentless touring schedule he couldn't stop booking. Trapped by a need for validation that no amount of applause could satisfy. 2 marriages before Adrian. Velma Warren. Deidre Jenkins. Same pattern. James worked. They left. He never learned why. 1984. Adrian Rodriguez. She saw the wounded child. She had wounds too. 2 broken people. 1 inevitable explosion. 2 broken people finding each other. What could go wrong? Everything. Their marriage was marked by police calls, by reports of domestic violence, by explosive fights followed by passionate reconciliations. James had built an empire on control, controlling his musicians, his business, his image, but he couldn't control his relationship with Adrian, and that terrified him. Rocky IV. Living in America. Grammy winner 1987. Comeback complete. Except James wasn't coming back. He was running. Pills. Cocaine. Not for fun. For survival. To quiet the 4-year-old. It didn't work. The voice got louder. The drugs didn't work. The fame didn't work. Even Adrian, the only person who truly understood, couldn't fix what was broken. And in 1988, the world would watch James Brown fall apart in real time. His behavior became increasingly unpredictable. The man who had once saved Boston from burning was now a man who couldn't save himself from his own demons. September 1988. Shotgun. Insurance office. Police chase across state lines. Tires shot out. James kept driving. The godfather of soul, reduced to this. When they finally stopped him, James was arrested and charged with multiple offenses. The man who had performed for presidents, who had saved Boston from burning, who had invented funk music, this man was now on television in handcuffs, clearly disturbed, clearly in crisis, and the whole world was watching his humiliation. 2.5 years in prison. No stage. No audience. Just silence. The thing he'd run from his entire life finally caught him. Prison released James Brown. But it didn't release the 4-year-old boy. And that boy? He was still standing in the doorway, waiting for someone who would never come back. Released. Back to touring. Hip-hop built empires on his beats. Funky drummer sampled thousands of times. James got nothing. A ghost in his own legacy. January 1996. Adrian died. Cosmetic surgery complications. 47 years old. The only person who understood him, gone. Something in James died with her. Prison didn't break him. Humiliation didn't break him. But this? This broke him. When Adrian died, James's last connection to being understood died with her. 6 more years of performing. 6 more years of asking. 6 more years of silence. 2002. Another marriage. Tommy Ray Heine. Legally invalid. More chaos. He kept performing. Body failing. Voice breaking. Still asking the question. Still waiting for an answer. December 25, 2006. Christmas Day. James Brown died of heart failure at a hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. He was 73 years old. He had spent 70 years trying to answer the question his 4-year-old self had asked when his mother walked out the door: why wasn't I enough? He had performed in front of millions. He had invented funk music. He had inspired everyone from Mick Jagger to Michael Jackson to every hip-hop producer who ever touched a sampler. He had changed American music forever. But the question never got answered. The wound never healed. 15 years of legal battles. $90 million. Even in death, people fought over him. Even in death, he was alone. The truth? What made him great destroyed him. 70 years filling a void that couldn't be filled. Answering a question with no answer. The Cape routine was the truth: I can't stop. Stopping means silence. Silence means death. His legacy? Turning pain into power. Proof that you can start from nothing and change everything. But at what cost? The warning? Millions said he was worth staying for. But the one person he needed to hear it from never came back. Listen to James Brown now. You're hearing 70 years of one question. A question with no answer. A wound that never healed. James Brown, godfather of soul. Inventor of funk. Legend. But also, the boy who was left behind. Who spent 70 years making sure no one could leave him again. The world knows his name. But the boy never got his answer. That's the price of becoming a legend. James Brown spent 70 years asking a question that had no answer. But here's what haunts me about his story: we're all asking the same question. We're all that 4-year-old child in some doorway, watching something or someone walk away, wondering if we were enough. The details change. The faces change. But the wound? The wound is universal. You see it everywhere once you start looking. The entrepreneur who works 80 hours a week, convinced that the next deal will finally prove they matter. The artist who creates compulsively, terrified that stopping means disappearing. The parent who overcompensates, trying to give their children what they never had, but still feeling like it's not enough. We're all performing our own Cape routines. Collapsing. Getting back up. Collapsing again. Hoping that this time, this performance, this achievement will finally answer the question. But James Brown's life teaches us something crucial: external validation never heals internal wounds. Millions of people told him he was enough. Grammy Awards told him he was enough. The fact that his music literally saved a city told him he was enough. But none of it reached the place that needed healing. Because the wound wasn't about what he achieved. It was about what happened before he could achieve anything. It was about a little boy who learned that love doesn't stay. So what's the answer? If 70 years of being the greatest performer in history couldn't heal James Brown, what hope do any of us have? Maybe the answer isn't in the healing. Maybe it's in the creating. James Brown took his deepest pain and transformed it into something that changed music forever. Every beat you hear in modern music, from hip-hop to pop to electronic, carries traces of James Brown's wound. His pain became the rhythm that moves the world. That's not nothing. That's everything. The tragedy isn't that James Brown was broken. The tragedy is that he never knew his brokenness was sacred. That the wound he spent 70 years trying to hide was actually the source of his greatest gift to humanity. We don't need to be whole to matter. Sometimes the cracks are exactly where the light gets in. Sometimes the wound is the work. If this story moved you, if you saw yourself somewhere in James Brown's journey, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Because these aren't just stories about famous musicians. These are stories about what it means to be human. About the wounds we carry and the beauty we create in spite of them, or maybe because of them. Next week, we're diving into another legend who transformed pain into art. Someone who, like James, couldn't stop performing even when it was killing them. The question James Brown asked never got answered. But maybe asking the question is the point. Maybe the searching is what makes us human. And maybe, just maybe, the wounds we're so desperate to hide are exactly what the world needs to hear. Thanks for listening. And remember, your brokenness might be your masterpiece.